Okay, so for the new people that are here, I'll just do a quick introduction about myself. Nathan Boone. I'm an organic produce grower. I've been growing for about 20 years. Indiana Farmers Union, I'm representing them because they sent me to get trained as a trainer. And I went through a 2-day PowerPoint, every single line, every single slide for the it's this entire binder in PowerPoint, and it's called Death by PowerPoint, and I survived. And so I'm qualified. See that? I'm qualified to teach you this binder. So if you want this binder, you're in the right place. No, seriously. So the first part was about an introduction to food safety in general. This session I proposed to Purdue because this stuff, it's really hard to translate this onto your farm. Like, how do you do this? How do you do this on your garden, your farm, your operation, your orchard, what have you? And where the rubber hits the road is inside your food safety plan. You're not required to do a food safety plan in FSMA, but it's highly recommended, and it's actually one of the best ways for you to figure out how to implement best practices on your farm, because this is going to force you to walk through all the different areas of your farm and figure out how you're going to do stuff based on the best science and the best practices that FSMA has thrown out into the challenge the nation's farmers how to step up and how to do a better job. So how to write a food safety plan is a little daunting and overwhelming. There's a lot of templates. You don't quite know where to start. For me, like, I would run into one question and I would just freeze because I didn't know how to answer it, so I couldn't complete my plan. So it's an evolutionary step-by-step process. And so I really wanted to have this hands-on workshop so we could really address people where they're at and then try to help each person take the next step in what you're needing to do for your food safety plan. So do you have to have a real fancy food safety plan? No, you don't. And I have standard operating procedures that I think is the best template that will help guide you and kind of show you. But I want you to take a step towards this season before production starts, because no farmer has any time once spring hits. And this is going to wait all the way until next year, and we're going to be talking about it maybe again, hopefully again. So anywho, that's just a quick introduction. The people who were here last time kind of told us who they were and what they were wanting out of this workshop. So I'd like to focus our time on the new people that weren't here at the last session, and just maybe tell me a little bit about what you're wanting out of this workshop, or where you're at with your food safety on your operation, or where are you at with actually drafting a food safety plan. So let's start here, and then we'll move. I'll just do the new people because all the other people I recognize them. And hi, in the back there, I see you kids back here. So go ahead.
This will be the first year of doing produce at the farmers market.
Okay.
We have been doing baked goods at the farmers market, so
Okay.
it's just making sure we're headed in the right direction and
Okay.
not starting out with the errors.
Okay, good. That's a good move.
I sell farmers market as well as CSA and to restaurants, so I want to make sure, especially with a couple new restaurants, that I have
Mhm.
a food safety plan so I can get certified.
Okay.
Make sure that I'm in compliance for the restaurant.
Okay, great.
You're on about a half acre in wholesale.
Okay.
This is in Chicago, and I just want to make sure that I'm following best practices.
Okay. Are you?
Expect me to have a plan.
Yeah. Are you wholesaling to retail or to restaurants or to distributors?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
small CSA, there's restaurants, does
Okay.
some farmers markets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Just a produce students working with Dr. Tamara Benjamin
Oh, okay.
on a project in dairy. So urban farming, so I think food safety is needed. Yeah, that's why.
Great. Good deal.
I'm also a graduate student at Purdue,
Okay.
agricultural science, education, and communication. So a little bit newer to this stuff, but
Okay. Good deal. And any new people over here that weren't in the first session? Yeah.
I'm curious, I know more about produce.
Okay. Great. Great. And then the folks in the back, all the way in the back.
We represent a farm school, so we're
Oh, okay.
learning what we can.
Great. Well, you're in the right place, because if you're touching food and someone's eating that food, then you need to learn about food safety because that's how people get sick. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And we're going to talk about how to create a food safety plan that will help you organize your operation so you're actually addressing all the different areas of concern. So let's dive into the PowerPoint. Also, just to let you know, I have a number of resources up here. This one right here is a risk assessment. No matter who you are, I'm recommending you do this is step one. Because you don't want to just download a template off the internet and put your farm name on it and stick it back on the shelf. You want to understand your farm, your operation, and where your risks are and how you need to address those risks. And then, once you do that, then you can create, and you can copy paste all you want as long as it's relevant to your operation, standard operating procedures. SOPs are how you do things on your farm that address the areas of concern to reduce your foodborne illness risks. So this isn't about eliminating risk. We can't eliminate microbes in the world. It's not possible. And we're around them all the time, but it's about reducing the points of contact where they can get onto food, and that food can then get into someone's mouth and make them sick. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay. So I hope this won't be death by PowerPoint. This is about how to develop a farm food safety plan. How many people, maybe we can pass these around while we're here. How many people have a copy of this? I may not have. Maybe if you could just go around and see, because we may kind of address it and look at it.
So raise your hand if you want the SOP.
And I may not have enough for everyone, but I just kind of want to have it as a resource. So even though FSMA does not require, FSMA does not require you to have a food safety plan. It's really a great way to just get yourself organized and figure out how to do stuff. So one of the things is it has to describe the one qualified person who's going to be designated. That's usually you as the producer. But if you have multiple people, like you have an orchard, how many people are in the operation? Like 10 people? Oh, 2 people, okay. So someone's got to be the food safety nerd. So you have to like designate that. And here, this is where the rubber hits the road. Conduct a risk assessment of your farm's practices and your environment. That's what that thing is right there. That's going to guide you. You just do that exercise. That's if you don't do anything else from this workshop, do that exercise because that will guide you through the risk assessment on your operation. And then once you do the risk assessment, you start to develop management steps and practices to reduce those risks. It's not so much about, how you grow your crop or how you do this. It's just about your management steps and your operating procedures to reduce the risks, okay? And then this is about traceability, and we may have time to get into that. I'm not going to emphasize this so much because if you don't have this stuff in the beginning, you never get to this anyway. So it's more important that you kind of that you bake the cake before you put the icing on. I know this is really super important if you're a big producer and you're shipping a lot of product to a grocery store chain. You have to have that traceability. You really, really do. But if you're a small operation just getting off the ground and you don't have these pieces, but you have a really kick-butt traceability program, I mean, it's kind of backwards, right? I mean, you need to have the basics done first. Okay, let's see what the next one says. And it's not working, so let's try this. It wants to do an update. Maybe a little bit of support here and see where we get. Oh no, for some reason there's a little dialogue. If you could check out the screen there. Okay, so food safety plans. Again, as I was saying, FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act, does not require a food safety plan. However, everyone agrees, almost everyone agrees, these guys agree, that it's a critical component of addressing food safety on your farm. Because it walks you through, it kind of forces you to write your own book about what you're doing on this farm. So we're going to go through a food safety plan by incorporating good agricultural practices as combined with FSMA produce safety rule requirements. So why do you want to do a food safety plan? Well, it helps you to get organized and to concentrate on food safety while you have brain bandwidth to do it in the winter. Like, we don't have time in the production season, there's just too much. I had a grower who wanted to get GAP certified, and it was like April. So he was already greenhouse doing production, he was already getting ready to transplant in the field, and he wanted to get GAP certified for that particular season. It was impossible because he just didn't have time. We tried to write the plan, we tried to get the GAP certification application in, but he just didn't have time. So don't kid yourself. Winter is the best time for you to up your game on food safety and writing a food safety plan. And the way you do that is you describe your risks and that you've identified, again, that worksheet on the risks, and then you start to define your practices, your policies, and your standard operating procedures. This is how you do stuff. It's not how you grow your produce. Like, we use a Ford tractor and we transplant, and it's not about your production. It's about the food safety aspects of your particular operation. And I want you guys to, because time is a limited resource here, I want you to prioritize the highest risk areas of your operation. And that's what this worksheet is going to guide you through. It's going to help you to understand from a food safety standpoint. Like, you might have a goal to build a cooler room, or you might have a goal to trench a main line in. I mean, that's your production goal as an operator, as a farmer. But you have to put on the food safety hat and think about, where is it from a food safety standpoint, where is my farm most at risk? And that's where you want to concentrate on, rather than thinking about your infrastructure goals or your marketing goals or your fertility goals. This is a different hat, so you have to kind of shift your thinking and your consciousness about thinking about food safety. So again, if you do move towards having a food safety plan, you're going to be way more prepared. You want to have that, like you mentioned, that you're selling to restaurants and to other people. You want that to be part of your story when you meet that new customer. You don't want them to have to ask you, hey, by the way, do you guys do anything for food safety? What's your food safety deal there at your farm? And you don't want to say, well, last year I looked, you don't have anything to say because you're not actually doing it. In that conversation, if you say, we take food safety very important, and we have an ongoing food safety plan that we use to manage all the risk on our farm, and here it is. I mean, that's a much better conversation to be having with a potential buyer, whether it's a CSA customer. You could put that on your website. We're committed to food safety. This is what we do. Boom, boom, boom. Or with a potential chef. They want to know you're doing the right thing, so you have to demonstrate that. And the food safety plan is one of the ways. I know some farmers use that as their, when they're trying to get a new customer, they use that in their marketing and their conversations to give them the confidence and reassure them that, yes, we know about food safety, we've been trained, we've gone to the day-long workshop, I have my little certificate, and we have a food safety plan, and we're actually implementing it on our farm. So for those that are new to this talk, I talked about how all the other industries, if you think about a restaurant, a grocery store, any kind of food handler, they have to do all kinds of things, and they have to write it down, they have to document it, they have to have temperature cooler logs, they have to have hand washing stations. Everyone's seen that little sign-in sheet for when the bathroom was cleaned last. Why do you think they do that? Because those are required in those industries. And farmers have been off the hook for about 10,000 years. And now we're being asked by society and by the instrument of our government and our legislators to up our game. And so we're going to do that. It's a piece of cake. It's a little bit challenging because we've not done it. We're not as good at the paperwork as some of the other industries, but we're going to get there. Third-party audit, we're not going to go into that a lot. That's what's called the GAP audit. That's an industry certification that is required if you're selling to usually a larger distributor or to a retail chain like Kroger. The first thing that a large produce buyer is going to ask you, are you GAP certified? Because if you're not GAP certified, they can't buy from you, because the lawyers and all the people that are involved in insurance will not cover you unless you're GAP certified. So that's the new standard in the wholesale world, is to be GAP certified. That's not what this is going to be about, so I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot. And just in general, most people that are a small operation, they're not covered under FSMA, but you do want to be meeting those best management practices and those standards to protect your operation. How many farms have general liability insurance for their operations? So, okay. So, okay, so not specifically for the produce.
Like, yeah.
Like maybe more like homeowners. Yeah. So any general liability insurance policy is great, obviously, because that's what insurance does. It protects you from an accident or for something that happens. But if you're proved to be negligent, that insurance is not going to want to cover you. So if something happened on your operation, like someone got sick, and you're like thinking, oh, I've got general liability, someone gets sick, they'll pay for it. Well, that insurance company is going to ask you, very likely they're going to ask you, okay, what happened? And because they don't want to pay you. The insurance company that you paid does not want to pay you. And if they find that you're negligent, it's all over. They're not going to, even though you have the insurance coverage, they're not going to cover you. So these are ways for us to kind of step up our game and get prepared and be ready. Oh, it's doing it again, John.
So is it keeping you from moving to the
Yeah, I can't click forward unless I do it. Maybe it's because.
Well, and it's given us the spinning wheel of death if we try to click out of it. He knows a little bit more than
Okay.
I do. He's Max.
Max.
Yeah. Is it?
Stand by.
Real quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
On this checklist. that
Yeah,
you have,
the risk assessment.
Yeah, it has the checklist on the back. It says required farm food safety planning and required designated food safety individual.
Yeah.
So you're saying this is best practice to have this because it's marketable and it makes sense and you want to keep everybody safe, but this
Yeah.
is saying required. So is FSMA saying, like, yes, we need to have a plan in place, and I guess someone has to go to the Purdue training, like, no matter what scale or what size?
Okay, so the FSMA requires an individual to be the contact point person, to be the food safety person for that operation. That is required if you're covered under FSMA. If you're not covered under FSMA, then you're off the hook. You're not required to do that. So maybe that's what was confusing in that document. Assuming that you are covered under FSMA, that your sales are above 500,000 and you're selling to, like, let's say a Kroger or what have you, then you would have to have the full-on food safety plan. You'd have to have all that stuff would be required. But my guess is that you're not. So this food safety plan and getting the day-long training is a best management practice scenario. So it's encouraged to do it so that you can understand food safety and that you're the contact or point person. Because if someone's not the person responsible for putting this together and keeping an eye on it, then it doesn't happen. You know, it already doesn't happen even when we are. Hey, Sherry.
Are we going to talk through those requirements as far as FSMA with income and?
Yeah, I have a slide. I have a slide for that. I can pop it up as soon as we get this going. Okay.
I have asked an extension question.
What's that?
Just extending on his, are there federal regulations, well, do they vary by state? So I know FSMA is federal, but are there different regulations state by state?
Not under FSMA. FSMA is national. So it's the same standard for the entire country. Now that doesn't mean that each industry doesn't have best management practices to address the type of situations, but by and large it's a federal guideline. So everyone has to deal with compost the same. Everyone has to deal with manure the same. Everyone has to have hand washing stations. Everyone has to have a way to clean their processing facility. So
Additional state requirements or?
that would go above and beyond FSMA standards. Yeah, like your health department, is going to have standards for, like, if you have a value-added commercial kitchen, your county is going to tell you how to do that. But those standards, by and large, are going to be consistent, and you're going to find that there's a similarity because they're all based on the same science and the same industry practices. So there's not going to be a radically different approach in one state versus another for the same problem area. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is about only you can identify and reduce risk. This is why you don't want to copy and paste someone else's farm safety plan, because you have to actually walk through it. And that, again, that risk assessment sheet is going to help you find risks that are specific to your farm, and it's best done by you, the person that knows most about your operation. And each commodity is very different. I've had different questions, some about apples, some about other crops. You have to understand where your crop is being grown. Is it being harvested by hand or machine? Is there single or multiple harvests, and all these sort of things. And ultimately, your question was about who's your food safety person. It's usually your main operator, or maybe it's just you because you're the only operator. The thing that's really important to understand about also your food safety plan is you have to implement it. Like, you can't just write it and set it on the shelf. Like, you actually have to implement it yourself. You're the one who's leading the food safety implementation on your farm, and you want the other people. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's your workers, maybe it's an intern, maybe it's volunteers. Everyone has to be on board with the critical areas that you identify on your farm. Also, the person who does all this has to have, it's really important, they should have the authority to make any sort of changes, because if you're working for your boss and you say, hey, I just came back from this conference and we should really do this in our hand washing station, and they're like, no, I don't want to. So you have to be the person, ideally, that can actually implement the changes, because there's probably going to be some things that you're going to want to do. Okay, so there are different parts to a food safety plan. Obviously, in the beginning, this is all super obvious. Your name, your farm description, talks about what's being grown, your farm size, who is the food safety manager. That means you, usually. Your risk assessment and practices that you're doing to reduce food safety risks. And then lastly, but most importantly, in the FSMA world, in the food safety world, if you don't document or you don't record in a log or a template or a worksheet, and there's lots in the back of this one right here, it kind of shows you some logs for all kinds of different things. If you're not writing it down, it means you didn't do it. And if you're not doing it and you're not writing it down, then your food safety plan is kind of dead and not alive. You want it to be an alive plan. So that kind of means, unfortunately, that means that you need to create some logs and some clipboards, and you need to have protocols and processes on your operation, like at your hand washing station, or more importantly, like in your packing area, wherever you wash and handle produce. You need to have logs as to when you clean that facility, if you use sanitizer, when you use them. I mean, you need to you're probably doing some of these things already, but you kind of have to prove it to the world that you're actually doing it. And that's kind of like, that's a big step, I think, for us as growers, is we do a million things and we don't think about writing them down. We're not really required to. If you're an organic certified producer, you're probably a little bit more used to writing some things down. Like, you have to write down when you do things, like when you till a field and when you plant and when you harvest. I mean, you just write down the big stuff. But these are more of like, think about a restaurant and all the things they have to keep track of, or a grocery store. They have to keep track of when they do things, and they have to be able to show it. So you're kind of being asked to do the same thing. Some of the other things that are in your food safety plan is farm maps. This kind of shows your production areas. And equally important is not only your production areas, but what's immediately adjacent to your farm. Is there a confined animal feeding operation a mile down the road? Is there sources of contamination? Yeah.
Having a confined animal location is different than, say, the neighbor's 3 acres, they have 2 horses wandering around the field, right?
Well, it's all, so you're thinking about where the microbe's going to come from. How is your produce going to get contaminated? And you're trying to reduce that risk. So yeah, having an adjacent neighbor with livestock right up against the edge of your farm, that's a point of contact. Like, you need to know about what's going on there.
Okay.
So it'd be important to put in your map, for example. Any other questions? That's all back there.
Can I piggyback on that just really quick?
Yeah.
So as a county ag educator, I get the question that she just brings up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I've served outside of a bedroom community outside of Cincinnati. And I get these questions from new landowners that have retired, or they kind of
decided to start their own land. They don't want to farm per se, but they want to get a horse or two. And so I'll get these questions from some of the produce growers and even just some of the gardeners I get, that they've got a 5-acre plot and their neighbor has a 5, 10 acres, whatever. And there's a pond that may run off during some of the flooding we've had recently, and they have a few horses. I think there may be something to be said for the amount of manure you're going to be getting from 2 horses versus, 100 head.
Oh,
of
sure,
dairy cow.
sure,
You know,
sure.
the chances that the hill up here, where the horses are out in the field and they defecate, the chances of that getting through the water several acres down to your field are relatively low compared to if you have a load capacity of 100 dairy cows.
Yeah.
That is really running off, and there ends up being more regulations with that as far as the lagoons and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. So there is a pretty large difference. But
Yeah.
just being aware,
Yeah.
that's certainly.
Yeah, and also to piggyback on that the thing is the contamination. It doesn't take a lot of contamination to make someone sick, right? So the thing is, it's more about where is it coming from and when. So like, for example, if that horse pasture is upslope from you and it does flood during the summer.
I think it is, but it slopes the other way.
Okay, that's great. So in that case, your risk assessment would be that, like, yes, you do have a neighboring livestock, there is potential for manure there, and that the runoff is in the other way, then that just reduced your risk. Another way of looking at it is it could be like a seasonal thing where, maybe you're not growing a crop that has soil contact. Maybe it's an above ground crop. So that also would reduce your risk in that way. But if you have, if you have a situation where you have direct runoff into your production area, and you're like doing salad mix during the summer, and there's summer runoff. I mean, anytime your land is flooded, that crop is supposed to be done over.
Keep the swamp all the way in the back.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how that would kind of play out. Okay. I'm gonna jump from farm maps to SOPs, because farm policies and SOPs kind of start to blur and merge into one thing. Your standard operating procedures are how you actually handle the different aspects of your farm. Like, how do you do hand washing? How do you train your workers? How do you maintain your restroom facilities? How do you harvest and transport and pack your produce prior to washing? How do you wash your produce? It's all the how stuff. It's not the why, or it's not about the production per se. It's about the food safety aspects of your operation. And so when you look through these standard operating procedures, and the reason I like this one is I think it's the most concise, and it's the most active languaging on how to do things on their farm. You'll kind of get it. When you read through a couple SOPs, you'll be like, oh, this is the orientation. It's not about like, oh, we wash our hands every day. I mean, that's not an SOP. I mean, so this is going to break it down for you and help you to kind of understand it. And so I'm encouraging you to move more towards this and don't worry about your policies as much.
I will say, we are a commercial blackberry farm.
Okay.
We have to have the GAP certification.
Okay, so you're
we're
GAP
a
certified.
third-party audit, we've done all of this, but a good SOP saves you, because I don't know if anybody else is like me. I'm our food safety person, and they'll ask you questions like, how do you do this, or how do you handle that? And I mean, I know we do it every day. I have 5 binders of logs, but sometimes you're put on the spot, and it's, there's something critical you might forget. But I can flip right to my SOPs and say, oh, this is our procedure for whatever, and it's all laid out there for you.
Yeah.
So it's very important to have all your steps and have great SOPs. They've saved me a couple times.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point. Thank you so much. Okay. The other things in the SOPs are your training records. You want to document, and those are in this SOP at the very end. There's a worker training log. So if you're training yourself, your spouse, your partner, your volunteers, your interns, you need to have that on a regular basis and done, so it's in that binder. Your water test results, if you're on a well, wells are actually a source of contamination. You can have bacterial and E. coli contamination inside your well. And you can be using that water to drink and irrigate and in your greenhouse and on your crops and not even realize it. So getting your water tested and Purdue used to give out these free water tests. I don't know if they do anymore.
Depends on the county.
Yeah.
A lot of times we'll refer you to the lab in Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
Lakes.
Okay.
Just depends.
So testing your water source is really important. If you're on municipal water, some student farms are on municipal water, you have to get a copy of that water treatment's certification that it passes the test, and usually it does, but you just need to have that. This is self-explanatory. Supplier and buyer information. So most operations are buying stuff in supplies. It could be compost, it could be fertilizers, it could be blood meal. Where does blood meal come from? It comes from blood. So all of these things can bring in sources of bacteria that you could be spreading around your farm and not even really realizing it. So the food safety plan is going to kind of have a list of all your supplies, everything that you're bringing onto the farm, and could that be a potential source of contamination? Traceability and recall plans. Again, for me, I'm kind of saying, I might get in trouble for this, but I'm kind of saying this is icing on the cake. If you don't have the cake, your traceability plan, I mean, it's important to have it and to think about it, and we can get into it. But I really want you to have the risk assessment and the SOPs and getting the training kind of up to speed. And the traceability is something to develop after you have those basic core pieces, because you want to reduce the risk first. You don't want to have a really great traceability program and then have a really bad problem with getting people sick. So I like to put the horse in front of the cart. Okay, so when you're assessing your risk, I know some of this is a repeat for the first people, the first session, but again, going through here and really understanding what's going on in your farm. You have to review your farm environment and adjacent land. We talked about the adjacent land a little bit. Again, your focus is not on how you think of your farm and what you want to do with your farm. It's thinking about the microbial, the chemical, and the physical risks. Physical risks are like broken glass. How many people have lights in their operation that if they broke a light bulb, that glass would fall down into their packing area? Okay. What about jewelry? People wearing jewelry while they're working in the field. I mean, any of these sort of physical contaminants can get into produce and then find its way into someone's home and on someone's plate. So these are also some of the things to think about.
Random trash carried in the yard from the
Yeah,
farmers.
yeah, anything like that.
Find all kinds of good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, actually in California, a woman was bitten by a rattlesnake because it got into the cilantro case, and the grocery. I don't know how they unpacked it, but somehow they unpacked the cilantro and the worker got bit by the rattlesnake because it was actually in the case. So that's a risk. Again, identifying risks that are most likely to occur, noting the ones that could happen often. So again, you're trying to get the most bang for your buck. You can't prevent everything or reduce everything, but you just want to identify the most likely. And because time and money are limited, you want to prioritize which to address first. Ranking your risk, that's what the worksheet does. It helps you to rank and find the hot spots, because you're probably, in the limited time we have before spring production starts, you're probably not going to do the entire thing. Also, changing your production practices or developing new ones can increase risk. So you bring in new people. Maybe they don't know about food safety. Maybe they need training. Because our workers, ourselves and our workers, are the ones that bring in a lot of these problems. Changing processes, retrofitting equipment, or changing suppliers, all of these can just introduce variables. Kind of going through this. So this thing right here, knowing what resources are required to successfully implement practices, for me this means how can you set yourself up for success? How can you start developing the systems on your farm that are going to help you to maintain and reduce food safety or reduce food-borne illnesses? So you're looking at your people, you're looking at your equipment and infrastructure, you're looking at systems for how to stay clean and hygienic for your workers and for your contact surfaces. And then you create a list of tasks and steps that need to be done. And this is kind of obvious for you. You're it. You're probably the person in charge, so you're on the hook for trying to get some of this done. And so when you have all this in mind, you start looking at these SOPs, the templates, and you start developing and implementing them for your operation. A lot of these SOPs are broad enough and specific enough that you can almost copy and paste a lot of them. Like what do you do? What do you do if there's broken glass on the farm? Well, 1, you clean it up. 2, you document it. 3, you put it in the trash bag. 4, you replace it with a plexiglass cover. I mean, that's your SOP for broken glass, and that's going to be the same no matter what. So when you review the SOPs in this template that I've provided, you're going to see the ones that like, yeah, that makes sense. That's the smart thing to do. Or you'll be like, that's totally ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. Or I'm going to do something different that's going to get the same result. Bottom line is you want to have a way to deal with all these different risks on your farm. So if someone asks you, hey, what do you guys do if there's if someone cuts their hand in the packing house? What's your SOP for that? How are you going to deal with that? I mean, you probably would deal with it just intuitively, like, well, you need to go wash that wound, you need to put a Band-Aid on it. But does that worker come back to work? Do they put on a glove? What's the policy for your glove use? Do they change that glove? Do they put their hand in water again? I mean, there's all these questions. So like that's where the SOPs really spell out exactly how you do things and why you're doing them. And then building the record keeping into the logical flow of activities. I was talking about this operation that I tried to help get GAP certified last year, and I don't know, how many clipboards do you have? You mentioned you're GAP certified. How many clipboards do you guys have?
It's in binders, so.
Okay, so how many?
5 binders.
Yeah.
Organized different
So,
ways.
because this was a produce operation, I tried to make it easy for them, and I actually made all the different forms, and I put them on clipboards, and we hung them right where all the different stations were. So the cooler temp log was right on the door of the cooler, and the dunk station, the clipboard was right there for their sanitation treatment log. And so, you know, every place, and I had like 25 clipboards, right? That's for GAP certification, so that's a whole nother ballgame. But if you don't make it easy for yourself to do it, you're probably not going to do it. For me in my operation, I actually use Google Forms. I have on my cell phone, I have a little app, and I go right to my field activity log, and I can push, and which field, which crop, which activity, and it date stamps it automatically, and I'm done. And I can do that while I'm driving the tractor. So you've got to make it easy for you. Some people like to have the paper, the clipboard, and you might need it for your workers because you're working with water, wet produce. You're not going to stop and get out your phone with wet hands. But the whole idea is you make it easy for yourself. So set it up, make it easy for yourself. Maybe it's a binder at your home office. Maybe you have a habit of, at the end of the day, you sit down at your home office and you check your email, and maybe you can go through your binders and you can just jot all these things down. Whatever works for you, that's the whole idea. If you don't make it easy for you, if you don't make it convenient, you're less likely to do it. And then revise your plan. So next winter, our next conference, you can revise your plan and kind of see where, it gets better and better. It's an evolutionary process, and you can make it better and better. And you want to review and update it at least annually to make sure it's relevant. Okay, we already kind of talked about it. It's really important to make your own, not to copy someone else's, even though that's a good way to start, because if you want to see how someone else is doing it, you don't have to recreate the wheel. You can take a look at it. But again, you have to make it relevant for your operation, and ultimately you have to implement it. If you're not implementing it, then you're halfway there. It's good to have it, but you want to be implementing it in your actual operation. Okay, here's a really important thing, and this can get a little overwhelming. So you guys are at the high end at the GAP certification. You don't have to be at that level unless you want to get GAP certified. So in these templates, like the one I passed out and other ones that you find, it's A to Z. It covers every single aspect. If that's not relevant for your farm, like if you don't irrigate with pond water, forget it. You don't need to worry about it because it's not a risk factor for your farm. Or if you don't grow certain crops, then you don't need to worry about that particular risk factor. Or if you don't have livestock on your farm, then you don't have to have an SOP for how you deal with that. So just make it relevant to only what you're doing to keep it things. Don't write things in there that you're not doing. Okay, if you're not going to do something, don't put it in there. And the best example I can give is gloves. Everyone thinks, because you see, gloves are everywhere now. Like you go to every restaurant, every facility, everyone's wearing gloves. And that seems like a really sanitary thing to do. And it can be. But if you don't wear gloves, and there's no reason you need to wear gloves unless there's an injury, but don't put a glove SOP in your farm plan. Just don't do it, because if you're not going to use it, don't put it in there. And that's kind of the whole point of don't put things in there that you wish you're going to want to do or not going to do. It doesn't have to be long or complicated. An SOP can be 3 lines. You know, a worker gets sick, that worker is asked to go home and not return until they're fully recovered. That's it. That's all you need. So you don't have to like write a novel. You just have to explain how are you going to deal with a particular situation, and it has to meet best management practices, and they're kind of intuitive and commonsensical, but it doesn't have to be overly complicated either. And you'll see in the examples the SOPs are pretty straightforward. Pick the practices and schedules and the record keeping that you know you can do, and focus on the risk reduction again. Like, don't do the 25 clipboards and then not fill them out. Do 1 clipboard and fill it out, and then maybe next year do 2 or 3 or what have you. But the whole point is to make this relevant and actual for your operations, so you're actually implementing them. So now you've got your written plan in place, you've got your SOPs, you know where your records are, and you're doing all these things, and this is kind of what I'm saying. We're going from farm to buyer to consumer, and then we get the traceability. I'm not sure if I want to cover the traceability. John, what's our time on this?
We've got about 18 minutes.
18 more minutes, okay. Did you want to see that slide for who's covered? Because I feel like we're at a good stopping point before we jump into traceability.
I'd be interested in that.
Okay, I think maybe I'll do that at the very, very end, and I can also show a slide. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of dive into traceability? Because I'm going to march through some of these slides on what a lot is and how to do traceability. Any call?
And Nathan will be here for consultations later, correct?
Yes, exactly. So after this session, I think from like 11:15 until lunchtime, they've got me cornered in a little room, room E over here. It's going to feel like an interview room. But I'm going to be in there, and I can answer any questions or talk about your operations or any questions you have, and try to help you take the next step.
Do you have any trainings coming up that you're doing?
Sari, do we have any trainings that are coming up with the Indiana Farmers Union? I don't, not that I'm aware of.
We'll pay for you to go through the whole PSA training today with Purdue Extension, so if you want to sign up for that, that's $100 to take that class. So if you want to sign up for that, we definitely can
Yeah.
give you a scholarship if you like that. So
And
if you do, I would say talk to Nathan and take down your name.
yeah, and also I forgot to mention that Indiana Farmers Union has a grant from the FDA. It comes, originally from the FDA, and I'm available to do one-on-one consultation with you on your farm, or to help you with the food safety plan, or just to kind of review your overall situation. And so I'll go to any farm in the state. I'll visit you. I'll look at your operation. I'll sit down with you. I'll try to get you resources. I'll try to figure out where you're at in the whole continuum of this and how to help you take the very next step. So that's one-on-one technical consulting that Indiana Farmers Union is providing to the state. So that's available too. Okay, traceability. So following quality, that means identifying boxes that have quality issues, keeping track of the amount that's sold, so knowing what sells well and how much money you should be making. These are all kind of just talking about the value. Why is traceability, in addition to like being able to deal with a food recall or if there was a problem, these are other benefits of having a traceability program. So it's basic record keeping. So you want to know your quality, keeping track of how much you sell, and then minimizing the foodborne illness impact. So if for example, God forbid something happened and you got that call to like, oh, my aunt had to go to the hospital and we think it came from your farm. Well, how in the world do you know, how do you know where it came from, which crop it was, where was it harvested? Like, you can't be a detective unless you know where anything comes from. So like, that means like you basically have to shut down your entire farm until you figured out where the problem was. And that's kind of what happens with, in my understanding, like if the FDA has to, if there's an outbreak and they fly people in, they go check it out. They come to the farm and they're literally detectives. And they're trying to find out where was the source of contamination. First of all, what is the contamination? What is the microbe? Where did it come from? How did it get introduced? And how did it get spread? So they're going to try to figure all that stuff out. And remember this recently with romaine, they shut down the whole industry for like what, like 6 weeks? So all those production areas, because they couldn't find it. They couldn't actually trace it. I mean, it's amazing because all those places have traceability programs, what I'm trying to tell you guys to do. But they couldn't figure out where it was. So they said, okay, we're shutting the whole industry down until we can get to the bottom of this. And that's kind of on a microcosm. That's what could happen at your own operation. Like if you don't know what the culprit is, you kind of have to assume that everything's potentially a risk. So that means you have to but if you knew exactly where it was, like, oh, it came from this bed and it came from that worker, then you can remove that risk and your entire operation, 99.5% of your operation doesn't have to get shut down. You just deal with the problem where it is. And that's where traceability, that's the whole point of traceability, to find out where the problem is so you can minimize based on a load, a lot, or a bin, or what have you. So you have to know how much was sold in the marketplace and know who purchased it and who consumed it. So in this world, we're talking about one step forward and one step back. That means that you need to know where the produce came from and you need to know where it went. So if someone calls you and said, hey, we got a problem with your tomatoes. So you know where your tomatoes were grown, and you also know where your tomatoes were sold, because let's say you sold tomatoes to 10 different customers and one of them calls you with a problem. You need to realize that maybe those other 9 customers also got the same tomatoes, so now you need to contact them. Just in the worst case scenario, I'm saying. So you kind of have to know where everything comes from and where everything is going, and that's what it's talking about, one step forward and one step back. So, yeah.
That's more like we'd be selling at a farmer's market, but that's not collecting everybody's name that buys.
No. Yeah, no. This is talking about buyers where you send invoices and that kind of stuff. And again, end users are typically not. But you would know, like for example, if you're in more than,
Sold at markets.
are you in more than one market?
Yeah, but same county, same umbrella market.
So we were in 5 markets, and it would be good to know, like maybe the illness came from one of the workers, so we'd want to know which market, during what time period the problem came, and then we could find out, oh, we had a sick worker, or they got the box from this particular bed. I mean, you still even need to kind of know what's going on with how your produce is moving. So again, this is the field where it was grown and the buyer that it's going to. This doesn't mean that you're responsible for the entire system. Like once it leaves your farm, it's kind of the other person's problem, but you still need to be able to know where it came from and where it went. Like obviously you don't have control over if you sell it to a wholesaler or distributor or retail, you can't handle it, but you still have to be able to answer their basic question. If they call you with a problem, you need to be able to take that one step back. Understanding a lot. So produce tracing requires defining and following a distinct portion of a particular crop. Do you guys in the apple world, do you have lots that are based on harvest days or by the variety that you pick that day? How do you do that? Or you might have a lot definition. It can be anything you want, but it just has to make sense.
Yeah.
It just has to be logical.
It depends on how many workers we have, and it varies so much
Yeah.
from year to year.
Yeah, sure. But it's just the point of this is that a lot is the definable unit that makes sense to you. And then, so if someone called you up and say, okay, well, tell me the code on the box, and they say it's lot 456A, and then blah, 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 you would be able to trace that back, and that would make sense to you, and you could figure out what exactly that lot came from. Maybe that was a harvest day. So every day there's a different lot number. Or maybe a particular bed has its own lot number. Or maybe it's a time, like during this particular week, when something was grown and processed, that particular week has a lot number. You just want to divide it up, because you don't have to condemn your entire farm, your entire crop, based on one single recall. This thing called a clean break. A clean break is when you are processing or packing or harvesting a particular crop, but you stop and you, like let's say you clean or sanitize all of your surfaces, so that like that melon operation in Colorado I was talking about, if they never stopped and cleaned their line and they had a recall, they'd have to assume that every single melon they sold that entire season needed to be recalled. But if you have a clean break that involves kill steps or sanitation, then you know that lot, like maybe on Monday, like maybe every day at the end of the day, you have a clean break and you clean your facility. Whether it's a dunk tub or an entire factory, it doesn't matter. At that time, you know from that starting point that that's a definable lot, and that you can confine any sort of recall or traceability to that lot. You don't have to condemn your next lot, because your next lot started off on a clean slate. It should be clean. That's the idea of a clean break. This is kind of a difficult issue, is how big should your lot be? I mean, you don't want to have every single stalk of produce be its own lot, because then you've got 3 million lots to take care of, and you can be like, well, I only want to, but that's just too hard to manage. And you don't want to make your entire crop one lot either, because that's a little bit too vague and broad, and you won't be able to actually recall it. So if there's a problem, the whole lot's recalled. So the bigger the lot, the bigger the recall. And that happened with the romaine. They recalled everything because they couldn't find it. So it just needs to make sense for you. Again, these lots are kind of more if you're selling to like a restaurant or a wholesaler or somebody that you're writing an invoice to. It's a little different with farmers markets, I would say, but you could maybe do it on the basis of your harvest dates rather than maybe the individual crop, and not calling lots, because you're probably not going to write it down. You're just going to have it maybe in an activity log.
We're also a microfarm, so we
Okay.
have little bitty.
You have little bitty lots, little teeny
We're not-
lots.
Yeah, we're not big scale at all.
I have a silly question. Like, I don't necessarily, I do a clean break at the end of the day, but I don't like write down lots, but I do, like, I do a lot of lettuce. So like, I'll write the harvest date on the label that I put on every single bag.
Yeah.
Would that qualify as like a lot label?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would. Some farmers use the Julian date, which is the sequential dates, from starting January 1 is 1, and December 31st is 365. So they use that as a number. But a date works the same. So just imagine if someone called you and said, I ate your salad mix and I got sick. You could say, well, tell me what's on the label. And that would be meaningful to you, because it's got to be able to help you trace back what happened with that. So you would know which field it came from. You would maybe know who was working that day. You would have enough information to kind of play detective to figure it out. Yeah. So this is, we're getting into developing a lot code. So this is numbers or letters or a combination. It should give you information about the farm, the field, or the bed, the harvest date, and any other maybe identifying information. Maybe it would be like the red romaine, rather than the romaine. It would be specific to the crop. It has to be unique to that particular lot. So it's going to have a label, a stamp, or a sticker, or it's going to be on the box of the bag or what have you, because the consumer needs to be able to tell you what's on that. So that's fairly obvious. Again, we talked about lot code. Here's a map of different farms, 1, 2, 3. So maybe their lot code starts first with the field number, and then the commodities grown, and then maybe a method for harvesting or pack dates, and then the harvest or packing crews. These are for larger operations. These might all be the same for you, but this is just walking you through how they think about it. So for example, this is a label for Empire. They have got apples. It's got the harvest date on there. It's got the farm location if they got multiple. It's got the block, so that they harvested block 1 on that day. Crew, it says all. And this lot code, which means something to them. Each of these numbers means something that farm manager, that safety manager could get and say, okay, I know exactly where that came from. I know where it was stored. I know who harvested it and all that. So these are just different ways that a larger operation might do that. Labeling. There's different ways to label, but again, it's got to be the best system for your farm. Figure out how that can be done, but try to put information on there more than just your farm name and your logo and that kind of stuff. Try to get it to where it can actually be meaningful to you. We have till 11?
5 minutes.
Okay, maybe. So here's a great example. What do you do at a farmer's market, or what do you do at a farm stand? So you're being asked to prominently and conspicuously display at the point of purchase, which means where you sell, the name and complete business address of the farm where the produce was grown on any sort of label. So you can see this one here looks really good produce, but there's no sign there other than the name. But over here you've got, it looks like maybe they've got more signage, and there might be actually a location here. But that gives you the basic idea.
So basically, it's just like a laminated piece of paper. with
Yeah,
a sign.
yeah. Your label, instead of labeling each individual produce, you're just kind of labeling the entire farm. So, and your farmer's market manager is already asking you to do that.
Our banner says we're from Mooresville, we've got contact
Yeah.
info.
Yeah, there you go. So I think I'll just pause at this point because we only have a few minutes, and we can maybe dive into any questions or anything that people might have before we break. And again, I'm going to be available from 11:15 to noon in the interview room and E, if you guys want to dive in more. And I'm available after this event as well. If you want one-on-one consulting, just ask me and we'll set it up. And there's no charge to you because the Indiana Farmers Union has already received the grant, and we're looking for growers to help. That's the point of the grant. Yeah.
Did you guys say that let's come talk to you and give you our name if we're interested in taking the one-day course through Purdue?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we can get you the resources to do that too.
And there should be a map in your registration book, but the classroom that he's going to be consulting in for the 45 minutes after this session is just down this hall and to the left.
Yeah, it's kind of squirreled away. You go left, and then it's like a little room to the right. So,
Hidden hallway.
yeah. Great.
Nathan, thank you so much. Let's give him a round of
Thank you.
applause.